ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبع الهدى. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome back to our Hadith discussion, which we are talking a little bit about the book Hidden Defects in Prophetic Narrations, Al-Kashkul fi Dhikr al-Hadith al-Ma'lul. This is a short book review, summary, and commentary upon this book. So previously we talked about some of the scholars of the second and third generations of the Hijra, after the Hijra of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We mentioned some of the scholars who authored books about hidden defects and some of the contents and principles and techniques that they mentioned within those books. From amongst them, Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah in his book Tarikh al-Kabir, and Imam Ali ibn al-Madini and Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in, and those students who actually compiled the views and the opinions of their teachers, of their shuyukh, about different narrators, about a hadith, about different matun, about even issues related to fiqh. So we want to move on today in our discussion and discuss a little bit about who were the scholars from the 3rd and the 4th century after the Hijra of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who were the scholars of the 3rd and 4th century who were known for their knowledge of hidden defects? What were some of the books and compilations that they authored? From the greatest of these scholars, who was actually, he passed away and died in the beginning of the 3rd century of the Hijra, was Imam Abu Abdurrahman al-Nisa'i, rahimahullah. And he was known from the experts and masters in the field of having knowledge of hidden defects in ahadith. And all of those who were previously mentioned were nowhere close to Imam al-Nisa'i's extensive knowledge of hidden defects and his knowledge and know-how and experience of how to discover them. So much so that the great Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, he said about Imam al-Nisa'i, he said that Imam al-Nisa'i is comparable to Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Ahmad, and more knowledgeable than Imam Muslim and Abi Dawood. And for this reason, you'll find that many scholars actually consider Sunan al-Nisa'i, his book, to be the 3rd of the 6 books of hadith in order, meaning Bukhari being first, Sahih Muslim being second, and then An-Nisa'i being 3rd, then followed by Abi Dawood, then At-Tirmidhi, then lastly the Sunan of Ibn Majah. So Imam An-Nisa'i, he had a very high and lofty status amongst his contemporaries. Whenever he would congregate with them, everyone would remain silent and listen to what he had to say. He was the most knowledgeable of his time, as Imam al-Dhahabi mentioned about him. When Imam ad-Daraqutni was asked about Imam al-Nisa'i and Imam Ibn Khuzaymah, Daraqutni, he replied, he said, no one living during his time could take precedence over him, even though Imam Ibn Khuzaymah is a very great Imam. So Imam al-Nisa'i's expertise and mastery of this science of hidden defects and discovering and clarifying hidden defects in hadith becomes clear when reading and studying his Sunan al-Kubra, in which he would sometimes designate an entire chapter to clarify a hidden defect in a hadith. And we would recommend that our students of hadith and students of knowledge familiarize themselves with Imam al-Nisa'i's Sunan al-Kubra and get used to reading the chapter headings and then looking at the different hadith that he puts in the chapters, and it will come clear to you after some research, after some study, that Imam al-Nisa'i many times was trying to clarify a hidden defect in those hadith. Also, we find in the 3rd to 4th century, Imam Abdurrahman ibn Muhammad Abu Hatim al-Razi, whose book of Al-Ilal was compiled and arranged by his son according to jurisprudence categories. And this book contains questions directed to his father Abu Hatim and his maternal cousin Abu Zur'a. Also from the scholars who authored books related to Ilal in the 3rd and 4th century of the Hijra was Ibn Hibban Abu Hatim al-Busti, who died in the year 354 after the Hijra. He authored a great book called Ilal Awham al-Mu'arrikhin. Ilal Awham al-Mu'arrikhin and Ilal Manaqib al-Zuhri and Ilal al-Hadith or Ilal Hadith Malik ibn Anas, and also Ilal Ma Asnada Abu Hanifa. So Imam Ibn Hibban, he had a very deep understanding of the books of Hadith, as is clear in his Sahih Ibn Hibban and also in his compilations about Ilal. Ilal Awham al-Mu'arrikhin, Ilal Manaqib al-Zuhri, Ilal Hadith Malik ibn Anas, Ilal Ma Asnada Abu Hanifa. And one of Ibn Hibban's books that contains the most mention of hidden defects is his book Al-Majruhin. Al-Majruhin. And the Imam of the 3rd and 4th century Hijri, the Imam of Ilal, is Imam Abu Hassan Ali ibn Umar al-Daraqutni, who died in the year 385 after the Hijra. And he actually authored one of the largest and most important books available about Ilal, about hidden defects. If this book was lost, then we would have lost a large amount of the principles, the techniques, and teachings about how to discover hidden defects in Hadith. And the amazing thing about this book is that it is mentioned that Imam al-Daraqutni, he narrated it, he dictated it to his students all from his memory. And his book is arranged according to masanid, according to narrations of specific companions. And the majority of what he mentions in his book is the differences between the chains of narration and their wordings within the different ahadith. Imam al-Darqutni, he also mentions the different aspects of how one chain is stronger than another chain of narration. He mentions the causes of errors and mistakes for certain narrators and supporting evidences to consider one evidence or chain stronger than another. Imam al-Darqutni, he also authored a book, his Sunan, in which he tried to clarify the gharaib. The gharaib or gharib is generally a hadith that is narrated that contains some kind of uniqueness, either absolute uniqueness or relative uniqueness. And the book Sunan by Imam al-Darqutni, he wanted to compile this book to clarify the gharaib which are used for fiqh. And Imam al-Darqutni, he also has a book called At-Tatabbu', in which he criticized many hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So we find that it was normal for the scholars who came from later generations to criticize or critique the scholars of hadith from the earlier generations. But when they would do so with manners, they would do so with adab, they would do so with adillah. proofs and evidences. They wouldn't resort to name calling or some of the things that we see some of those who claim to be busying themselves with Jarh wa Ta'dil in our days and times. May Allah help us all. Another great Imam from the 4th century who authored a great book on ilal is Imam Ibrahim ibn Muhammad Abu Mas'ud al-Dimishqi, who died in the year 401 after the Hijrah. And he actually authored a book in response to the hadith that ad-Daraqutni criticized in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. He also has a book called Atraf al-Sahihain, in which he clarified some hidden defects in some hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. But unfortunately, this book is still in manuscript form, according to my knowledge today. Hopefully somebody has done tahqiq of it, done the research and found the manuscripts and found copies and done, inshallah, to bring it out from the darkness into the light. So then moving on from the year 400 Hijri onwards, we find that the compilations about hidden defects, biographies of narrators, and takhrij referencing a hadith increased and became more common and popular. It was during this era that the science of hidden defects really started to ripen even more and flourish and emerge and spread amongst students of hadith and amongst the scholars of hadith and amongst the other scholars of different sciences from the sciences of Islam. And many of the principles and techniques were known, and whole compilations containing a hadith that contained hidden defects started to emerge more and more. The scholars from the first 4 centuries, they were definitely the ones who laid the foundations for the scholars who succeeded them. So now, this brings us to our next topic in our discussion today. Is it important for the student of knowledge or the scholar to have knowledge of ilal, to have knowledge of hidden defects, to know the principles and techniques to be able to recognize and discover hidden defects in narrations? Why is that? First of all, yes, it is important. First and foremost, so that this knowledge of the deen is preserved and protected and passed on to future generations. It is also important that the Muslims know how to distinguish between the authentic hadith and the inauthentic hadith. So some advices for the students of knowledge, the students of hadith, is that they should busy themselves with learning and studying the books of mustalah al-hadith. And from the most common and popular books of mustalah hadith, starting from some of the earliest books of mustalah, is a book called Al-Muhaddith Al-Fasil Bayn Al-Rawi Wal-Wa'i. And this book was authored by Imam Ar-Ramah-Hurmuzi, who died in the year 360 after the Hijrah. But in this book, he didn't compile every single topic related to mustalah hadith and definitions and terminologies. Then we find after him Imam al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, who died in the year 405 after the Hijrah. And also he didn't really compile all of the different mabahith, all of the different topics related to mustalah hadith as well. And his book was kind of arranged kind of like a kashkul, right, in different order, not kind of a logical order, starting off with sahih and then maybe hasan and then da'if and then the different types of asanid, the different types of marasil and mawquf and hadith al-diraya wa hadith al-riwaya. And then we have Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, who died in the year 463 after the Hijrah. He authored a great book called Al-Kifaya fi Ilm al-Riwaya. Al-Kifaya fi Ilm al-Riwaya. And this book has many beautiful issues and topics which are related to the sciences of hadith. He also clarifies in it the different principles that are used by the narrators and used for narration, and many things related to investigating the matun of the hadith. Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi also narrated another great and very important hadith for the student of knowledge, and particularly the student of hadith. It is called Al-Jami'u li Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Sami'. Al-Jami'u li Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Sami'. Basically, it is a compilation in which he put together the manners of the Rawi, the manners and etiquettes of the Rawi, the narrator, and the manners and etiquettes of the one listening. So the manners and etiquettes of the teachers and the manners and etiquettes of the students of a hadith. And this book should be purchased. This book should be read by all students of hadith so that you learn the manners not only of the previous generations of scholars and the students of hadith, but also we try to implement them when we are trying to learn hadith as well. Another famous book of mustalah that the students of hadith should get their hands on is the Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah. The Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah. It's actually called Ulum al-Hadith. Ulum al-Hadith is the name of the book. And Ibn Salah, he died in the year 643 after the Hijra. But it is more commonly known amongst the students by Muqaddimah Ibn Salah, by the introduction of Ibn Salah. This book, it mentions many it is one of actually the best books of Mustalah for beginners. So basically what he did, he gathered up all of the books that were written about Mustalah before him, Khatib al-Baghdadi and Ram Hurmuzi and the other scholars, and he basically extracted the fawaid, the benefits, and put it together in a very comprehensive and understandable way that is easy for the student. Another great and important book of Mustalah, which was authored by Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, who died in the year 676 after the Hijrah, is At-Taqrib wa Taysir li Ma'rifat Sunan al-Bashir al-Nadhir. This is also a book. This is actually an ikhtisar, a summary of Ibn Salah's book, Ulum al-Hadith. So Nawawi came after Ibn Salah and summarized Ibn Salah's book, Ulum al-Hadith, and made it into his book, At-Taqrib wa At-Taysir. And then after Imam al-Nawawi, one of the famous books of Hadith that we find is Nazm al-Durar fi Ilm al-Athar. Nazm al-Durar fi Ilm al-Athar. And this book was actually authored by Imam al-Iraqi, who died in the year 806 after the Hijrah. He died in the year 806 after the Hijrah, and it is more commonly known as Alfiyat al-Iraqi. Alfiyat al-Iraqi. And what Imam al-Iraqi did, he basically took Ulum al-Hadith by Ibn Salah, the Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah, and he added some benefits on, and he actually put it together in some very nice lines of prose. And then, subhanAllah, Imam al-Sakhawi came after him. About 100 years later, in the year 902, Imam al-Sakhawi, he authored the book Fath al-Mughith fi Sharhi Alfiyat al-Hadith. And this is actually an explanation of Imam al-Iraqi's book. And it is one of the best explanations of Alfiyah of Imam al-Iraqi. And then we have Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who authored a great book of Mustalah Hadith called Nukhbat al-Fikr fi Mustalah Ahl al-Athar. Nukhbat al-Fikr fi Mustalah Ahl al-Athar. Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who died in the year 852 after the Hijrah, he authored a very small, concise, precise, excellent book, one of the first books that a student of knowledge should start with when they are learning and memorizing Mustalah Hadith. And he invented a new way of categorizing the Hadith and categorizing the chapters that no other scholar has preceded him in doing so. And he actually explained this book himself in a book called Nuzhatun Nadar. Nuzhatun Nadar is an explanation of Nukhbat al-Fikr by the same author, Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Then we have in the 9th century, Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, rahimahullah, who died in the year 911 after the Hijra, who authored a great book of Mustalah Hadith called تدريب الراوي في شرح تقريب النواوي. And this book here is actually an explanation of Imam al-Nawawi's book. Imam al-Nawawi, what book did he author in Mustalah? He authored At-Taqrib wa-Taysir. So Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti came on later on, about 300 years later, 350 years later, or 250 years later, and he actually explained Imam Nawawi's book and mentioned many, many benefits and added many, many ziyadat on it as well. So these are some of the famous books of Mustalah Hadith. And also we have a small, short, very wonderful and great mukhtasar, a manzuma, which is called al-Manzuma al-Bayquniyah. Al-Manzuma al-Bayquniyah, which is also a great primer for a student of Hadith, that they should try hard and strive to memorize it. It is about 34 lines of poetry, if I remember correctly, and it is one of the best summarized small compilations that is easy to memorize and easy to understand, and it acts as a great primer for the student of knowledge. So the students of Hadith, they should have knowledge of Mustalah Hadith. They should at least try to strive to read these books and then move on to trying to memorize some of these mutuns, so they had a good basis, a good foundation to build upon when they start getting into the books of mutun, of the Hadith, of the Kutub al-Sitta, of the Masanid, of the books of Sunan, and they start delving into the narrations. They know what it means when Imam al-Tirmidhi says this Hadith is Hasan Gharib, or this Hadith is Hasan Sahih, or this Hadith has mutaba'at and shawahid and things like this. So Mustalah is like the first step on the ladder to delving into the books of mutun and then delving into the books of shuruhat. So yes, students of knowledge should familiarize themselves with the books of Mustalah. Students of knowledge, specifically students of Hadith, should familiarize themselves with and read frequently the 6 books of Hadith. The way that you're going to build the abilities to be able to discover hidden defects is, number 1, reading the books, trying to memorize the books of Mustalah, but then also delving into the aspect of the practical aspect of reading the Hadith and looking at the Hadith and analyzing the chains of narration and analyzing the matun. Also, it is important upon the student of knowledge to familiarize themselves with the books of Rijal, with the books of biographies of narrators, starting off with one of the biggest and largest compilations of biographies of narrators and biographies of all the personalities in Islam up until the 7th and 8th century, Imam al-Dhahabi's great concordance and great encyclopedia, Sir A'lam al-Nubala. And then from that, you find Imam al-Dhahabi has many, many books related to Ilm al-Rijal, the biographers, or the biographies of different narrators. Al-Kashif. He has Mizan al-I'tidal. He has many other books related to Mustalah Hadith. Then you have Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who also has books of Rijal. Imam al-Bukhari, as we mentioned, has At-Tarikh al-Kabir, At-Tarikh al-Awsat, in which he mentions different narrators and also mentions different narrations. At-Tahdhib At-Tahdhib by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, in which he mentions many different narrators and their levels and statuses and gradings of whether they're trustworthy narrators, whether they have some weakness, how precise they are or not. And many other books related to al-Rijal. So a student of Hadith needs to familiarize themselves with, first and foremost, the books of Mustalah, and frequently read the Kutub al-Sitta, the Ummahat al-Sitta. Also familiarize themselves with the Masanid, and from amongst them, the biggest of all is the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and then move on to the books of Rijal. So one thing that we need to keep in mind as well is that not every student of Hadith may reach the level in memorization, understanding, and experience with the narrations. However, they should continue to strive and keep learning and keep increasing their knowledge of the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wasallam. So hopefully today's discussion was beneficial as a reminder for the advanced student of knowledge, and hopefully it was an encouragement for the beginner students of knowledge to know some of the books that they need to dive into, and try to master on their way to learning more about the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in beneficial knowledge and action upon it. And until next time, for our hadith discussion, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.